The smell of gardenias had always been my favorite, my son knew that, which is why my daughter-in-law had filled every corner of the dining room with them for my 60th birthday. She stood near the kitchen doorway in a fitted cream dress, her dark hair swept up, surveying the table she had arranged with the kind of precision that made everything look effortless and intentional all at once. I had thought, watching her from across the room, that perhaps I had misjudged her. Perhaps tonight would be different. I should have known better. In 4 years of marriage to my son, my daughter-in-law had never once done anything simply out of love. My name is Margaret. I turned 60 in the 3rd week of October, in the house I had lived in for 31 years, the house where I had raised my son after his father died, the house where I had repainted every room twice, replaced the roof myself by taking a second job. The summer, Daniel turned 12, and planted the magnolia tree in the backyard that now scraped the second-floor window. The house where, 2 years ago, I had agreed to let my son and his wife move in while they saved to buy their own place. 2 years had become 3. 3 had quietly folded into 4. I want to be fair when I tell this story, because fairness matters to me more than sympathy. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, was not a cruel woman by nature. She was ambitious, which I respected, and sharp, which I admired from a distance. She managed a fitness studio downtown and ran it well. She dressed beautifully and kept her schedule like a general keeps a battle plan. What she lacked, what she had always lacked with me, was basic consideration, not affection. I never asked for affection, just the ordinary, human acknowledgement that I existed in this house not as a fixture but as its owner. That distinction had become blurry, I think, over time. For her, for me, it had never been blurry at all. My late husband, Robert, passed away 11 years ago from a sudden cardiac event at 54 years old. He was the kind of man who worried about everything: the gutters, the oil in the car, whether the smoke detector needed a new battery, and yet somehow none of that worry had ever extended to his own heart. He left behind a life insurance policy of $410,000, which I received in a single payment 8 months after his death. Once everything had been settled and the paperwork had cleared, I used most of it to pay off the mortgage on this house. The deed transferred fully into my name on a gray Tuesday in February, 12 years ago. I remember sitting in the title company's office with a pen that skipped on the first stroke, and the agent had handed me a new one, and I had signed my name Margaret Louise Calloway in letters more careful and deliberate than anything I had written before or since. This house was mine, wholly, legally, entirely mine. When Daniel and Vanessa moved in 4 years ago, I explained the situation plainly to my son. I told him the mortgage was paid. I told him the deed was in my name alone. I told him that while he was welcome to live here as long as he needed, I wanted him to understand the arrangement clearly, without any confusion about ownership. He nodded and said he understood. We did not discuss a formal rent payment because Daniel was between jobs at the time and I was not comfortable making my own son feel like a tenant. I told him simply to handle the utilities while he was here. What I did not know then, what I would only piece together later, from things my neighbor Carol told me she had heard, from a conversation Daniel's cousin overheard at a family gathering, from one particular comment my daughter-in-law made to a friend of hers while they were apparently shopping 3 blocks from this house, was that Vanessa had constructed an entirely different understanding of this living arrangement in her own mind. She believed that I was the one being helped. In her version of our situation, my son and she were doing me a favor by staying. I was a widow, getting older, and I needed them nearby. The house was old and required maintenance. Daniel handled things around the property, which was true, and Vanessa had apparently translated his weekend repairs into a kind of ongoing payment, not in money, but in presence, as if their being here was compensation enough for the roof over their heads and the food I sometimes cooked and left on the counter without being asked. She had, according to Carol, told someone at her studio that she and Daniel were essentially taking care of an aging mother-in-law and would eventually need their own space, but that they were too considerate to rush me. When Carol first told me this, I had laughed. Not bitterly, truly laughed, the kind that comes from somewhere unexpected and catches you off guard. because the audacity of it, the sheer architecture of the story she had built, was almost impressive. I said almost. I had not confronted her. That was a choice, not an oversight. I had learned something in 60 years that I wished I could pass down like a recipe, that the most powerful position in any conflict is the one where you hold all the information and reveal none of it. Vanessa thought she understood this house and her place in it. She did not. And until there was a reason to correct her, I was content to let her believe what she believed. The birthday party was her idea. She had offered to plan it, organize it, invite the guests. My sister Patricia and her husband drove up from Raleigh. Daniel's cousin Marcus and his wife came from across town. My oldest friend, Judith, who had known me since we were in our mid-20s and new to the same neighborhood, sat at my right hand and kept refilling my water glass. There were 12 people in total around the table, and Vanessa had cooked a full meal, roasted chicken, glazed carrots, those small fingerling potatoes I had once mentioned I liked, and for most of the evening, I thought perhaps I had been too hard on her. Dinner was warm and easy. Patricia told a story about our mother that made everyone laugh. Marcus's wife had brought a cake from the bakery downtown, chocolate with a pale yellow frosting. And it was exactly right. I turned 60, surrounded by people who knew me, in a house that was mine, eating food that was good, and I allowed myself to feel, for most of that evening, genuinely happy. We had moved from the table to the living room. The plates cleared and coffee offered when the shift happened. It started small, the way these things always do. My sister had asked me about my work. I had retired from teaching high school English 3 years earlier, then taken on some part-time tutoring, but that had tapered off in recent months when my hip had started bothering me more consistently. I mentioned this casually, in the comfortable way you mention something to people who already know most of the story. I said something like, "The tutoring has slowed down since spring. My hip's been giving me trouble, and driving twice a week to the Hendersons' place was just becoming a lot." My daughter-in-law was sitting across from me on the armchair she had reupholstered last fall, a project she had undertaken without asking me, replacing the original fabric with a gray linen that I privately disliked. She had a coffee mug held in both hands, and her expression, up to that moment, had been the pleasant, composed version she wore in company. She tilted her head very slightly. "So you're not tutoring anymore at all?" she said. "Not regularly," I told her. She paused just long enough to make the pause noticeable. "So, what is it you do, exactly, day to day?" The room did not go quiet, but something shifted in it. Judith looked up from her coffee. Patricia stilled. I looked at my daughter-in-law steadily. "I live my life," I said. "Same as most people." She smiled, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile that means something is coming. "I only ask," she said, her voice perfectly calibrated, pleasant enough that no one could object to the tone, pointed enough that the meaning was unmistakable, because Daniel and I have been talking about the future, about what makes sense. It might be good for everyone to think about what the next chapter looks like. For all of us. She looked around the room briefly, including the guests in her audience. You know, financial independence, having a plan. At some point, relying on other people's goodwill isn't really sustainable. The room was quiet now. I looked at her for a moment. I want to be clear that I was not caught off guard. I was not hurt. Not in the way she might have hoped. What I felt, sitting in my own living room on my 60th birthday, surrounded by people who loved me, was something closer to a door opening. A door I had been standing outside of for 4 years, and which had just, finally, swung wide. "Whose goodwill, exactly?" I said. "Are we talking about—" She laughed a little, the way people do when they want to seem unbothered. "Well, you know, it takes a village, as they say. We all lean on each other, but at some point, everyone needs their own foundation, their own stability." She looked at me directly then, and there was something deliberate in her eyes. "Don't you think?" Daniel, my son, was sitting on the couch to my left. I looked at him. He was looking at his coffee. I took a breath, not a visible one, not dramatic, just the kind that settles you. "I appreciate your thoughts on financial independence," I said. "I do. It's something I've thought about quite a bit over the years. For instance," and here I reached over to the side table where my reading glasses sat. a gesture that was unnecessary but gave me one additional second. I thought about it very carefully when I paid off this house. I said the last 4 words with no particular emphasis. I didn't need to. My daughter-in-law blinked. What? The mortgage on this house has been fully paid for 12 years, I said. I used the life insurance payout after Robert passed. Daniel was aware of this when you both moved in. The deed is in my name, solely in my name. I should have been clearer about that with everyone from the beginning, and I apologize for the ambiguity. I paused. But there is no ambiguity about the ownership itself. The room had gone to a particular quality of silence that I recognized the silence of people who are trying to determine whether they should say something or wait. My daughter-in-law had set her coffee mug down. Her composure was still largely in place, but something underneath it had cracked in the way that fine porcelain cracks invisible until you tilt it toward the light. Daniel told me the house was being managed, that it was. She stopped. She looked at my son. My son was still looking at the floor. His jaw was tight. Daniel knew, I said, not unkindly. We discussed it before you moved in. What followed was not a clean moment. I want to be honest about that. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, no grand speech. Vanessa excused herself to the kitchen. Daniel followed her. Judith squeezed my hand. Patricia poured herself more coffee and said, to no one in particular, that the cake had been genuinely excellent, and that was the right thing to say. And the room slowly let out its held breath. My sister found me later near the back door, where I had stepped out to look at the magnolia tree in the dark. You could have said that years ago, she told me. I know, I said. Why didn't you? I thought about how to answer her. I thought about what it means to know something and choose the moment when you use it. I thought about 4 years of small indignities absorbed quietly, of meals cooked and not acknowledged, of decisions made about my own furniture and my own rooms without consultation, of the way my daughter-in-law had gradually expanded into this house, the way water expands into the cracks of whatever holds it. And I thought about the fact that none of it had actually damaged anything that mattered, not the house, not my name on the deed, not the 11 years of choices that had led me to this evening. The right moment arrived, I said. Patricia nodded slowly. She has known me a long time. In the days after the party, the house held a different quality. My son came to me 2 mornings later, before Vanessa was awake, and sat across from me at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and the expression of a man who has spent several days trying to find the right words and has not fully succeeded. He said he was sorry. He said he should have been clearer with Vanessa, should have made sure she understood the arrangement from the beginning. He said he was embarrassed, which I believed. I told him that I loved him, which was true, and which I believed he needed to hear first. Then I told him that I had been thinking, and that I thought it might be time for them to move toward their own place. Not urgently. I was not asking them to leave that week or that month. But the arrangement had clearly run longer than any of us had anticipated, and I thought having their own home would be good for their marriage, which I also believed. He nodded. He did not argue. Vanessa and I did not have a formal conversation after the birthday party. We were not cold to each other. We were the thing that is more complicated than coldness, which is 2 people who have finally located the actual terms of their relationship and are still deciding what to do with them. She was, I think, genuinely embarrassed. I was not certain she felt she had done anything wrong, exactly, but I think she understood that she had miscalculated badly. And for a woman who prided herself on reading situations accurately, that was its own kind of consequence. They found an apartment 12 weeks later, a 2-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of a building about 4 miles from my house, modern, with new appliances and a parking spot in an indoor garage. I helped Daniel move a bookcase and a dresser on the day they left. Vanessa and I stood in the hallway of this house for a moment after the last box had gone to the truck, and she looked around the rooms in a way I had not seen her look at them before, as though she were seeing them properly for the first time. It's a beautiful house, she said. It was not an apology, but it was something. Thank you, I said. I've always thought so. She left through the front door, and I locked it behind her. And then I walked back through every room slowly, the way you walk through a house when it has just returned to you. The kitchen was mine again. The living room with its armchair and a gray linen I intended to recover. The back bedroom that I had been using as a combination storage and reading room because I had not wanted to reclaim it while they were here. I opened its window and let the October air come in, and sat in the old reading chair I had moved back in that morning, before they were up, and listened to the sound of the neighborhood cars, the Hendersons' dog, wind in the magnolia tree. I had thought I might feel something large, something proportionate to how long this had all taken. Relief, maybe, or triumph, or even grief, for the time that had passed differently than I had hoped. What I felt instead was quieter and more permanent than any of those. I felt like myself. I want to explain something about the kind of strength I had relied on through those 4 years, because I think it is different from what most people imagine strength to look like. It does not announce itself. It does not argue or justify. It simply holds, the way a foundation holds, not dramatically, not visibly most of the time, only apparent when something tests it. I had not set out to teach my daughter-in-law anything. I had not waited for the birthday party as a calculated moment of revenge. What I had done, what I had been doing, quietly, for 11 years since Robert died, was simply continue to be exactly who I was. A woman who owned her own home. A woman who knew what she had built and what it cost and what it was worth. A woman who did not need anyone's estimation of her to know her own value. The problem with Vanessa was never that she had ambition or drive or the kind of confidence that could read, from the outside, as cold. The problem was that she had confused my quietness for weakness and my patience for need. She had looked at a woman who was 60 years old, recently retired, with a hip that hurt in cold weather, living in a house with her son and daughter-in-law, and she had drawn a conclusion that felt logical and convenient and was comprehensively wrong. That is the thing about conclusions drawn from incomplete information. They seem reasonable all the way up until they don't. My friend Judith came over on a Saturday in November, 3 weeks after the apartment move, and we sat at the kitchen table with tea and a plate of the shortbread cookies she makes every fall. She had been at the birthday party. She had heard everything. She had not brought it up directly until that afternoon, and I appreciated her patience. She asked me if I regretted waiting so long. I told her I didn't think of it as waiting. I told her that the situation had not required anything from me that I wasn't already doing, which was living here and living well, and that the only thing I had ever truly needed was for the moment to be the right one. Not the most dramatic one, not the one with the most audience, just the right one. And that when a person says something untrue about you in your own living room on your own birthday, in front of your own sister and your oldest friend, in a house that is legally and entirely and unmistakably yours well, that moment does present itself. Judith laughed at that. She laughs the way she always has, with her whole face, and it made the kitchen feel very full. I have thought, since then, about what I would say to my younger self. The woman in her late 30s who had taken a second job painting houses one summer to cover a roof, who had sat in a title company's office holding a pen that skipped, who had signed her name very carefully because she understood that what she was signing mattered. I would tell her that the signing mattered in ways she didn't fully know yet, that the careful, unglamorous choices, the paid-off mortgage, the deed in her own name, the years of living within her means and knowing precisely what she owned those things would one day become, quietly and without announcement, the most powerful things about her. I would tell her that strength rarely looks the way we imagine it will. It does not usually arrive with a clear signal or a dramatic entrance. Most of the time, it is already there, already built, already paid for waiting calmly in the background of a birthday party for the exact moment it is needed. I would tell her, you don't always get to choose the moment. But if you have built something real, the moment chooses you. The magnolia tree is bare now, in the way trees go bare in November in this part of the country. The yard looks wide and open without its leaves, the branches reaching up in that slightly beseeching way that bare trees have, as if asking the sky for something. I have always thought they looked more themselves this way, actually. More honest. No decoration, no canopy, nothing softening the lines, just the actual shape of the thing, exactly as it is. I make coffee in the mornings and I drink it by the back window. I am reading the novels I had not had enough privacy to read. I have called my sister 4 times in the past month, just to talk. And twice we have laughed until I had to sit down. I am thinking about whether I want to take on a tutoring student or 2 in the new year. A particular young woman down the street whose mother asked me about it last week, and I think I probably will, when my hip allows. Because teaching was never something I did for lack of other options. I did it because I loved it, and that hasn't changed. This house is mine. The magnolia is mine. The armchair will be recovered in a fabric I actually like, probably a deep green or a warm cream, something that suits the room and that I will choose for myself without consulting anyone. I am 60 years old, and I know exactly who I am, and I know exactly what I own, and I am not in need of rescue from anything. That, if you want the truth, is what it feels like.